1900, one of the strangest events in maritime history took place. 3 lighthouse keepers on Ellimore Island have mysteriously disappeared. They were thought to be dead, but no body of any kind was found either on the island or in the sea. According to some, it was all an accident, while others thought it was a crime. But according to some, the reason was even more frightening. In 1895, a lighthouse was built on the island of Imore, in the Flannan Archipelago in Scotland, to make boat trips safer. Because the Flannan Archipelago consists of very sharp rocks, which created a danger for ships crossing the island in foggy weather. After its construction was completed, 3 people were appointed as watchmen of Mayak: Chief Guard Chem Sukat, Assistant Guards Thomas Marshall, and Daniel MacArthur. All 3 guards were very experienced and professional in their work. The main duties of lighthouse keepers were to keep the beacons and fog signals in working order. The watchmen took turns in the lantern room during the day, mainly cleaning, and at night to ensure the light worked properly. The guards assigned to the island had already been working for a year. While everything was going well, the first strangeness in the lighthouse was reported on December 15th, 1900 by the crew of the steamer Arctur, which was sailing towards the port of Leith. As the ship passed by the island, the crew informed the lighthouse control center that the light of the lighthouse was not lit. The next day, due to a strong storm at sea, the control center was unable to send a ship to the island to find out what had happened. On the one hand, it was Christmas, and nobody wanted to go to sea on those days. As a result, the supply ship Hesperus, sent to investigate, arrived at the island on December 20th. Usually when a ship approaches the island, the lighthouse keepers are obliged to meet the approaching ship. A did not go out to meet any water. The ship's captain, James Harvey, thought the watchmen were unaware of the ship's arrival and sounded the alarm. Again, there was no one approaching the port. Captain Harvey this time ordered a flare, but there was still no response from the watchers. Assistant keeper Joseph Moore was taken to the island by boat to find out what was going on. Necessary preparations were not made at the port until the ship arrived. The welcome flag was also missing from the pole. Sensing something was wrong, Joseph Moore climbed the steep rock steps to the lighthouse. When he reached the lighthouse, he found the entrance doors locked. The front door to the pantry was also locked, but the kitchen door was open. Moore entered the kitchen and the stove in the room. It was as if it hadn't been lit for a few days. There were plates of partially eaten food on the table. One of the chairs had been knocked over. It was as if someone had overstepped their bounds in getting up in a hurry. The clock on the wall had stopped. Entering the bedroom, Moore saw that all 3 beds were empty. 2 of the guards' cloaks hanging by the door were missing. This suggested that one of the guards had gone out in this cold weather without his cloak. The lighthouse diary and the 2-day work plan spreadsheet. It was on the board. Joseph Moore returned to the ship and told Captain James Harvey what he had seen. Harvey and 2 sailors then went out to the island to look for the guards, but the search was fruitless. Marshals Ducat and MacArthur seemed to have disappeared without a trace. Tammer and Harvey saw that all was well. The lamps were filled with purified lantern oil and ready to burn. Captain Harvey, who later inspected the area on the island, noticed that the westbound platform had been severely damaged by the storm. One of the food boxes had been pried open and its contents spilled on the ground. The iron bars on the side of the road leading to the lighthouse were bent and twisted. Part of the railroad track used to transport food and supplies had been detached from the concrete pylons. A boulder weighing more than a ton had been dislodged, and grass had been uprooted from the tops of rocks 200 meters above sea level. That evening, Captain Harvey Joseph Moran was asked to remain on the island to hold the 3 men in place and make further calls for the sentinels. He himself went to the telegraph station nearest the island and sent a telegram to the control center about the incident saying, "There has been a terrible accident at so-and-so place." The 3 guards, Duke Marshall and MacArthur, disappeared from the island. When we arrived on the island one afternoon, no one came out to meet the ship. We fired flares but got no response, so we sent Joseph Moore to the island to find out what was going on. Moore went to the lighthouse and found none of the lookouts there. The landing platform to the west had been severely damaged by the storm. By all indications, the accident happened a week ago. The poor men had probably fallen off the cliff and drowned while trying to fix something. I have also sent this telegram to Mr. Hid, in case you are not there. If you wish to send me a reply, it should be at the telegraph station by then. On December 20th, Board Inspector Robert Murhid was sent to the island to investigate the disappearance of the Sentinels. Robert knew all 3 missing men well. He had recruited them personally. Murhid first examined the statements of Joseph Moore and Captain Harvey. There was nothing to the contrary. But after examining Mayak's diary, Murhid noticed that the entries made in the last few days were strange. On December 12th, Thomas Marsh wrote that there had been a violent storm, the likes of which he had not seen in 20 years. He also noted that Jem Sukat was very quiet and that MacArthur was crying. In a note dated December 10th, he noted that the storm was still raging and that 3 guards were waiting for it to pass. Why had the storm frightened these experienced men? The last note, written on December 10th, reads as follows. The storm has stopped. The sea is calm. God is almighty. The strange thing is that there was no official information that there was a storm on the island on December 12th. Whatever happened to the guards, it was known to have happened on December 10th. Because if someone had died, they would have written something about it in the diary in the previous days. After reading the notes, Mizerhid began to examine the cloak hanging over the entrance and concluded that it belonged to guard MacArthur. Why had MacArthur gone out in the freezing cold of winter without a coat? Why had all 3 guards left the lighthouse at the same time, even though it was legally forbidden? Examining his broad platform, Murshid surmised that Dukat and his marching column had left the lighthouse in the storm to get supplies, and that MacArthur had followed them when they failed to return. Mohid's official report concluded that the keepers had been at the lighthouse until dinner on Saturday, December 10th, when a high wave struck them while they were trying to protect supplies on a storm-damaged landing platform, throwing all 3 overboard. After the official report was published in the press, many questions began to arise. If the guards had fallen overboard, why were none of their bodies found? That evening, the wind was heading towards the rocks on the island. If the guards had fallen into the sea, the waves would have carried the bodies to the rocks. But no bodies were found at the bottom of the cliffs. Another question was why MacArthur left the lighthouse in the winter cold without his cloak. Marshall and Duckett had gotten into a dangerous situation trying to fix something on the platform during the storm. Their cries for help and MacArthur's hasty departure from the lighthouse without his cloak. This could therefore explain the overturning of the seam in the kitchen. But in such a situation, it seems illogical that he would waste time locking the doors on his way out. Why did the keepers risk their lives in such a violent storm instead of waiting at the lighthouse? Marty was also sentenced to 5 years for the damage he caused to the materials he was responsible for in the previous storm. Given that 5 years was no small amount of time for an employee in those days, it would have made sense for the keepers to put themselves in danger. Since many years have passed since the incident, it is difficult to know how accurate or inaccurate some of the information is. For example, according to the Fort's Tide journalist Mike Dash, the strange entries in the notebook about the guards were added to the story several years after they disappeared. There are no official reports of storms in the area in the days before the guards disappeared. This suggests that the weather conditions were bad in those days. The details that give the story an air of mysticism, such as the overturning of the kitchen chair and some of the food left on the plates, are believed to have been taken from a poem written by the English poet Wilson Jepson in 1900. Some sources say that when Joseph Moore entered the kitchen, he saw the plates washed and clean. However, various versions have circulated in the years since the event took place. One version concerned the character of Danilt MacArthur. MacArthur was a man who had a short temper and would settle any dispute with his fists. All 3 were said to have fallen into the sea because of a fight he started on the platform. Another rumor about MacArthur was that he killed his Duke and his walker, threw them overboard, and then committed suicide by throwing himself off the rocks. However, No traces of a fight or murder were found at the scene. And given that the bodies were never found in the sea or on the island, it seems highly unlikely that these versions are true. Many mystical speculations about the disappearance of the watchmen also began to circulate among the public. There were even those who thought they had been swallowed by a gigantic sea serpent, or died in the claws of a giant bird. While such speculations may seem ridiculous now, they were seriously debated in society at the time. Other versions were mostly related to paranormal phenomena. The guards sent to the island by the storm were said to be the spirits that killed them. The Flannan archipelago is named after Saint Flannan, an Irish bishop who lived in the 7th century. On the island of Inmore, there is a chapel believed to have been built by Saint Flannan. According to legend, in ancient times it became a tradition for pilgrims to frequently visit the island and hold various religious ceremonies here. For example, visitors used to walk on their knees around the chapel. It is believed to appease the spirits that inhabit the island. The island was later used by shepherds to graze their sheep. However, the shepherds did not want to stay overnight on the island, believing that spirits lived here. When the construction of the lighthouse started, some people thought that it would anger the Holy Flann spirit. What happened in science in 1900? The mysterious fate of James Succat Thomas Marshall and Danilt MacArthur lighthouse keepers, who will probably never be known, has endured for 124 years.